Welcome. History is full of stories about conquerors, most of whom came from ruling families. For example, Alexander the Great was the son of a king. Usually, conquerors do not come from ordinary families living in poor areas, but this time our story is different, and it takes place on the island of Corsica. At the beginning of the 18th century, Corsica was part of the Republic of Genoa, but one day this island decided to declare its independence. To avoid problems with the island's inhabitants, it was decided to sell it. Thus, Corsica became French, happening just a year before Napoleon's birth. The island's residents were not pleased with the decision and began to protest against it. From a young age, Napoleon was used to participating in these protests and had some animosity towards France. However, Napoleon's father had a different opinion. He admired French culture, which created some tension between Napoleon and his father. On the other hand, Napoleon was very fond of his mother, who was quite strict and always scolded him. But he didn't mind that. Napoleon's family wanted the best for him, so they decided to send him to France to join the military academy. But everyone mocked him for his French accent and his family's poverty, so Napoleon spent most of his time alone. Napoleon was fascinated by the stories of heroic emperors, especially Julius Caesar, and he excelled in his studies, particularly in mathematics and geography. After graduating at the age of 16, he was given the rank of second lieutenant. While this rank might be sufficient for some, Napoleon was ambitious. Napoleon was not satisfied with this rank and wanted to achieve a higher one. Unfortunately, this task would not be easy. French society closed its doors to Napoleon, as promotions were given to noble families rather than based on skills. Napoleon was on the verge of giving up, but he thought it was time for a new revolution, and indeed the French Revolution had begun. Prisons were stormed, many heads were cut off, and the monarchy was abolished. The goal of the revolution was to restructure society's classes and bring everyone to the same level. Napoleon was not very interested in the revolution, but he realized this was his chance to get the promotions he desired, and he began to fight to defend the French Revolution. Napoleon suppressed an attempt to extinguish the French Revolution in Toulon, and afterwards he was promoted to the rank of colonel. He then quelled another attempt to stop the revolution by supporters of the royal family in Paris, and again he was promoted to the rank of general. His heroics began to gain fame among the people to the extent that he was granted a private army, and this advancement was impressive for a non-Frenchman, gradually making Napoleon's dreams come true. Napoleon realized that his status could advance further if he married a wealthy woman, but this task was not easy for him. Fortunately, he met a woman named Josephine, a divorced French woman drowning in debt, and for these reasons, she agreed to marry him. After the marriage, Napoleon had to leave his home to participate in the war. In addition to the French Revolution, tensions in Europe were continuously rising. Due to the French Revolution and the fear of monarchies that kings would take drastic actions to prevent the people from protesting against them, France entered a war against European states, starting the First Coalition War. France suffered at the beginning of this war, but later achieved surprising progress, and in many territories occupied by France, sister republics were declared. France spread its revolutionary ideas in Europe. In 1796, France decided to launch a triple attack on Vienna to eliminate Austria from the war. This campaign consisted of two strong armies from the north and Napoleon's army from the south to create a diversion. For the first time in history, Napoleon would lead a large military campaign, and this was his true opportunity to prove himself, which indeed happened. The army given to Napoleon was demoralized, lacked supplies, and had low pay. However, Napoleon succeeded in encouraging them with his powerful speeches. Napoleon took his army to Italy, and the number of troops was small compared to the enemy armies because the purpose of this army was merely diversion. But Napoleon succeeded in making this army the pivotal force in the war. While the northern armies were engaged in conflict with enemy forces, Napoleon achieved remarkable progress. Here, Napoleon executed his famous maneuver, dividing the enemy armies into two parts and successfully defeating them separately, managing to eliminate Sardinia from the war while the Austrian armies fled. In the famous Battle of Lodi, Napoleon himself was at the forefront of the battle, striking enemy forces with artillery, where the army loved him and followed his orders even if they led to a suicidal mission. As Napoleon advanced in northern Italy, he was warmly welcomed by the Italians. Napoleon's army plundered the occupied cities and sent resources back to France to support its economy. This earned him great affection from his army. The Pope was always supportive of Austria in this war, so he decided to attack him and teach him a lesson. After Napoleon began his incursion into Austrian territory, Austria found itself in a difficult position and had to request an armistice, agreeing to make Napoleon the overseer of the surrender terms. Napoleon managed to defeat Austria and remove them from the war using only his army, at just 28 years old at that moment. In the areas he occupied in Italy, he established a sister republic, wrote its constitution, and set up its government himself. When Napoleon returned, he was regarded as a true hero, putting the unpopular government in a precarious position, leading to his exile far from France to Egypt specifically. This was in hopes of disrupting the British Army's route to India. Napoleon saw this opportunity as crucial for regaining glory. Britain launched a naval attack on Napoleon, destroying his fleets, and he suffered a significant defeat in Acre at the hands of the Ottoman and British armies. Thus, Napoleon decided to abandon his army and return to France. His campaign in Egypt failed to achieve its objectives. However, one of Napoleon's key traits was false propaganda. He created his own newspaper and exaggerated his achievements, even commissioning portraits that depicted him as a hero. So when he returned to France, he was welcomed back as a hero again. After his return, Napoleon met an ambitious politician who had a grand idea. The idea was to overthrow the unpopular government of the time. But the person needed Napoleon's help, and Napoleon immediately agreed. The plan was to inform the government to voluntarily relinquish power, which they did. Subsequently, government members were imprisoned in a palace outside Paris. Thus, the state was ruled by 3 consuls, but after Napoleon made some amendments to the law, there was one ruler of the state, the first consul, Napoleon Bonaparte. During this event, Napoleon amplified the state's power and became a dictator, controlling everything at the age of 30. While he was in Egypt, France occupied more territories. While France was expanding in Europe and Napoleon was busy in Egypt, European countries felt it was time for another round, and thus the Second Coalition War began. But this time, it was different as Russia participated in the war. Russia wanted to teach France a hard lesson, and that's exactly what they did. France was severely defeated. Russia withdrew after a long delay in Switzerland, and since Napoleon had become the leader of France, he was ready for another war. He took command of the reserve army and advanced into Austria. Several factors made Napoleon a successful leader. First was the great love the army had for him. The second reason was the element of surprise. In 1800, Napoleon advanced to the city of Geneva, and it was expected he would attack the Austrian army in Germany. No one expected he would cross the Alps to attack the Austrian armies besieging the city of Genoa. Napoleon's crossing of the Alps was a legendary event. Upon entering Italy, everyone expected him to attack the Austrian armies to lift the siege of Genoa, but instead, he broke their supply line in Milan. This forced the Austrian armies to pursue him and attack him in the famous Battle of Marengo. Initially, the Austrian army defeated the outnumbered French army and celebrated their victory. But Napoleon returned with a large army, forcing the Austrian armies to withdraw. After General Moreau's victory at the Battle of Hohenlinden, Vienna became a site for the truce. Thus, Austria was forced to withdraw and request a truce. Like the First Coalition War, the Second Coalition War ended with a victory for France and Napoleon. At that time, Britain was the only country still at war with Napoleon, sending ships to blockade France and seizing resources from neutral ships heading to France. This angered the rest of Europe as Britain hindered their trade with France, leading them to form a union and impose a blockade on Britain, prompting Britain to attack some ships in Copenhagen. This caused the Union to later disband. Due to Britain's bankruptcy, a peace treaty was signed between France and Britain in 1802. And here, for the first time, there was a state of absolute peace in Europe.